I still remember the sound those keys made when they hit the pavement, not because it was loud, but because everybody heard it and nobody said a word. The guy who dropped them never even looked back at me. He just smiled at his friends like he finished telling the funniest joke of the night. And standing there in my faded navy valet jacket with shoes that had seen way too many winters, I realized something people rarely admit out loud. Some folks don't insult you because you've done anything wrong. They insult you because it makes them feel taller. My name is Ethan Brooks, and about a year ago, I was working the valet entrance at the Grand Ashford Hotel just outside Seattle, one of those places where luxury SUVs lined up before sunset. Businessmen talked louder than necessary, and expensive watches somehow became part of every conversation. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid my rent, covered my mom's physical therapy bills after her knee replacement, and gave me enough flexibility to attend night classes 3 evenings a week. Most people never knew about that part. They only saw a valet with worn shoes. That Friday had been unusually busy. There was a medical conference in town, 2 weddings booked in separate ballrooms, and a charity gala filling the rooftop restaurant. By 5 in the afternoon, the entrance looked like controlled chaos. Engines idling, bellmen moving luggage carts, guests checking their reflections before walking inside. Then a brand new black Range Rover rolled to the curb so smoothly it barely seemed to stop. The driver climbed out first, maybe early 50s, silver haircut perfectly, tailored charcoal suit, sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly paycheck. Behind him came 3 younger guys laughing about a golf trip, carrying themselves with that effortless confidence money sometimes buys. The driver looked straight at me for half a second, then casually opened his fingers. The key fob dropped onto the concrete between us. "Pick that up for me," he said without slowing down. His friends chuckled. One of them glanced at my sneakers and smirked. "Man, this place is supposed to be luxury." Another laughed. "Guess they spend all the money on the lobby." I looked at the keys, then at the group disappearing through the revolving door. For just a second, my stomach tightened. Every person who's worked customer service knows that feeling. You imagine every comeback you could say, then you swallow every single one because rent is due next week. So I crouched down, picked up the keys, smiled the same polite smile I gave everyone else, and drove the Range Rover into the automated storage system behind the hotel. Most guests had no idea how that garage worked. They thought it was just another parking lot. It wasn't. It was a fully automated vertical storage tower worth several $1,000,000. Cars disappeared onto robotic platforms, elevators carried them into steel compartments stacked 5 stories high, and a computer managed every movement with thousands of sensor calculations every minute. When the hotel installed it, the manufacturer offered 1 advanced certification course. Management decided it wasn't worth paying for anyone to attend, so I paid for it myself. 3 months of night classes, online exams, hands-on diagnostics, software training, electrical safety, emergency recovery procedures, all on my own dime because I figured knowing something nobody else knew might matter someday. Nobody at the front entrance cared. They just saw the valets. About 20 minutes later, elderly woman pulled up in an old blue Honda Accord with one headlight held together by clear tape. She looked completely overwhelmed by the self-service kiosk. I walked over before she could even ask for help. "First time here?" I asked. She laughed nervously. "Is it that obvious?" I spent a couple of minutes walking her through every screen, explaining where the ticket would print, making sure she understood how retrieval worked. She thanked me 3 separate times before heading inside. "Young man," she said while squeezing my hand, "your mother raised you right." That hit harder than she probably realized. My mom had always told me something growing up. She'd say, "People will remember how you make them feel long after they forget your name." I thought about that almost every shift. Standing near the entrance, our operations manager, Margaret Ellis, had watched the whole exchange. She'd also seen what happened with the Range Rover. Margaret wasn't the type to interfere unless she absolutely had to. But she noticed everything. About 45 minutes later, the same group came back outside laughing even louder than before. Apparently dinner reservations had changed and they needed the SUV immediately. The silver-haired man walked confidently to the retrieval kiosk, scanned his ticket, folded his arms, and waited. Nothing happened. He scanned again. Still nothing. Then the screen flashed red. "Retrieval error. Please contact staff." Within seconds, another guest tried retrieving a Tesla. Same error. Then someone with a Porsche. Same thing. One by one, people gathered around the kiosk. confusion slowly turning into irritation as the robotic tower behind the glass sat completely silent, every vehicle trapped somewhere inside, and I watched Margaret's expression change from concern to the kind of look that told me this night was about to become something none of us would ever forget. The first 5 minutes felt like 30. Guests who had been smiling moments earlier were now pacing across the marble lobby, checking their watches, making phone calls, asking the same questions over and over as if different wording might somehow wake the parking system back up. The automated tower behind the glass wall sat perfectly still. No motors humming, no platforms moving, just a silent steel monument holding close to 80 vehicles hostage. The man with the Range Rover, whose name I would later learn was Victor Langford, wasn't interested in patience. He slapped his ticket against the counter hard enough to bend it. "How does a five-star hotel lose an entire parking garage?" he snapped. One of his friends laughed nervously and said, "Maybe somebody forgot to plug it in." A couple of people forced polite smiles, but nobody else was amused. Margaret stayed calm, something I'd always admired about her. "Sir, our technician is on the way." Victor leaned closer. "I don't care who's coming. I have investors waiting across town, and every minute this circus continues is costing me money." It was funny hearing someone talk about lost money while standing in shoes that probably cost what I made in 2 weeks. Still, I kept my mouth shut and continued directing arriving guests away from the broken retrieval station. 15 minutes later, the manufacturer's emergency technician finally arrived carrying 2 laptops and a heavy diagnostic case. He connected cables, opened panels, typed commands into the controller, frowned, disconnected everything, then started over. I watched quietly from outside the valet lane while pretending to organize claim tickets. I recognized the sequence he was running. It was the standard diagnostic protocol they taught during the certification course. Good for routine failures. Completely useless for the kind of software lockup I suspected this was. The technician rubbed the back of his neck and sighed. "I've never seen this combination of faults before." Margaret asked softly, "Can you recover it?" He hesitated just long enough for everyone nearby to hear the answer before he even spoke. "Not quickly." Victor exploded. "Not quickly? What exactly does that mean?" "Could be another hour, maybe longer if we have to manually access the controller." "An hour?" Victor nearly laughed. "You're telling me 80 vehicles are trapped because nobody here knows how to restart a computer?" I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but there are some conversations impossible not to hear. Margaret looked around the lobby for just a second before her eyes landed on me through the front windows. She walked outside at a pace that wasn't quite running but definitely wasn't casual either. "Ethan." "Yeah, come inside." I looked toward the technician. "You already have someone working on it." She lowered her voice. "I know exactly who I have working on it." That sentence stayed with me because Margaret wasn't talking about the technician anymore. As we walked through the lobby together, I could feel dozens of eyes following the ballet in worn shoes. Victor noticed me immediately and rolled his eyes. "Seriously?" he muttered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Now they're sending the parking kid." One of his friends smirked. "Maybe he'll pray over it." A few people laughed. Margaret didn't. She looked directly at me and asked only one question. "Can you fix it?" I answered honestly. "I don't know yet, but I think I know where to look." She nodded once. "Then it's yours." The technician looked relieved more than offended. "You know this system?" "Certified on the Gen 4 platform," I replied. His eyebrows lifted. "You're certified? Level 3. He stepped back without another word. That alone changed the atmosphere. I knelt beside the maintenance panel, plugged in the diagnostic tablet I kept locked in my employee locker for situations nobody ever expected to happen, and began reading the fault log instead of the summary screen. Most people troubleshoot symptoms. Training had taught me to find the first mistake, not the loudest one. A software update earlier that afternoon had interrupted communication between the primary controller and the backup motion processor. The safety system had done exactly what it was designed to do: freeze everything before damaging a single vehicle. The problem wasn't mechanical. It was trust. 2 computers refusing to believe each other anymore. I almost smiled at the irony. Sometimes people aren't much different. I entered a manual authorization code, bypassed the failed handshake sequence, isolated the backup processor, and forced a synchronization reset instead of a complete reboot. If I had restarted the entire system, every elevator would have needed recalibration, adding another 40 minutes. Instead, I restored only the communication layer. The technician leaned closer. "That's not in the standard recovery manual." "No," I said while continuing to type. It was mentioned during advanced certification as an emergency workaround after an update conflict. I skipped that course. Most people did. 30 seconds later, the first yellow warning light disappeared. Then another. The hydraulic pumps came alive with a low mechanical rumble that echoed through the building like a giant taking its first breath after a long sleep. Every conversation in the lobby stopped instantly. People turned toward the glass wall. Platform indicators lit up one by one across 5 levels of steel racks. Green, 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 green. Finally, every diagnostic box on my screen changed from red to solid blue. Total recovery time, 3 minutes and 46 seconds. I leaned back and exhaled for what felt like the first time all evening. The technician stared at the monitor before looking at me. Well, I'll be damned. Margaret didn't celebrate. She simply smiled the way proud teachers smile when students prove everyone else wrong. "Can you retrieve Mr. Langford's vehicle first?" she asked quietly. Already cued. Seconds later, the elevator platform descended carrying the black Range Rover as smoothly as if nothing had ever happened. The glass doors opened. I walked outside, climbed into the SUV, drove it to the valet lane, stepped out, and held the keys in my open palm exactly the way I'd been trained to do on my first day. Victor stood there frozen for a second longer than necessary. Earlier that evening, those same keys had been lying at my feet. Now I was offering them back with the same calm respect I'd shown every guest all night. He looked from the keys to my face, then down at my shoes again. Only this time, there wasn't a trace of amusement left. His friends suddenly found the floor fascinating. Nobody cracked another joke. Nobody mentioned luxury. Nobody had anything clever to say. Finally, Victor cleared his throat. "You fixed all of that?" "Yes, sir." "How long did it take?" "Just under 4 minutes." He took the keys carefully this time, almost awkwardly, like they suddenly weighed more than before. He stopped. Whatever speech he had prepared disappeared somewhere between pride and embarrassment. For the first time that night, he actually looked me in the eyes instead of through me. "Thank you." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it sounded genuine. He started walking toward the driver's door, then stopped again. Without turning around, he asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why didn't you embarrass me back?" I thought about that for a second before answering. "Because the garage was broken, not my character." The lobby went completely silent again. Only this silence felt different. It wasn't built from tension anymore. It was built from realization. And as Victor climbed into his Range Rover and slowly drove away, I honestly believed that would be the last time our paths would ever cross. I couldn't have been more wrong. For the next few days, I figured the whole thing would fade into another strange story from hotel life. The kind you tell friends over barbecue and laugh about years later. Then Monday morning, Margaret called me into her office before my shift even started. I honestly thought I'd forgotten to clock out or parked somebody's car in the wrong spot. Instead, she slid an envelope across the desk. "Open it." Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. It read, "Ethan, I spent 30 years believing success gave me permission to measure people by appearances. Friday evening reminded me that competence, dignity, and character don't wear price tags. Thank you for teaching me a lesson nobody else ever had the courage to teach. Victor Langford." Tucked behind the note was something else, an invitation to lunch. I almost laughed. "You're kidding." Margaret smiled. "I'm not." Apparently, he insisted. I wasn't excited. In fact, I almost turned it down. People who spend a lifetime talking down to others don't usually change after one embarrassing moment. But curiosity has a funny way of winning. 2 days later, I met Victor at a small waterfront cafe instead of some exclusive private club. That surprised me. He stood as soon as I walked in, shook my hand with both of his, and the first thing he said was, "I owe you an apology. Not because you fixed my car, but because of the way I treated you before anything went wrong." There wasn't an audience this time. No friends. No expensive suits trying to impress each other. Just 2 people having an honest conversation. He admitted that he'd grown up poor, built a successful commercial construction company from almost nothing, and somewhere along the way started believing expensive things were proof of valuable people. "Funny thing is," he said while stirring his coffee, "my father worked maintenance his whole life. If he'd seen how I acted toward you, he probably would have knocked me upside the head." I laughed, and for the first time, I saw something human behind the confidence that had looked so untouchable a few nights earlier. We talked for nearly 2 hours, not about the parking system, but about work, family, my mom's recovery, the engineering classes I was taking at night. and why I'd spent my own savings earning a certification the hotel never required. Because opportunities don't usually announce themselves, I told him. They just show up disguised as ordinary days. He leaned back and smiled. That's exactly the kind of answer I was hoping you'd give. Before we left, he handed me a business card. One of my companies is building a new automated distribution center next year. When you finish school, give me a call. Not because I feel guilty, because I like hiring people who solve problems while everyone else is complaining. I thanked him, slipped the card into my wallet, and went back to work. I didn't quit the hotel. I didn't suddenly become rich. There wasn't some movie ending where my whole life changed overnight. What changed was much quieter than that. People at the hotel started noticing things they hadn't noticed before. Guests asked for me by name. The manufacturer invited me to help review future technician training materials after hearing about the recovery. Margaret promoted me into operations support a few months later, which meant fewer hours parking cars and more time managing the automated systems I'd spent so many nights studying. Even my old sneakers eventually wore out, and when I finally bought a new pair, I kept the originals in the back of my closet. Every once in a while, I still look at them because they remind me that those shoes carried me through one of the most important lessons of my life. The truth is, Victor wasn't the only person who changed that night. I changed too. Before that evening, I quietly hoped people would eventually recognize my value. After that evening, I realized I didn't actually need everyone to recognize it. I only needed to keep building it. Respect earned through character lasts longer than attention earned through pride. Looking back now, the most important moment wasn't when the parking tower came back online. It wasn't when 80 luxury cars started moving again. It wasn't even when the man who dropped his keys finally thanked me. The most important moment happened much earlier, when I bent down, picked those keys up without letting someone else's arrogance determine the kind of person I was going to be. That decision belonged to me, and I'm grateful I made the right one. So now, I'd love to hear what you think. If you had been standing where I was that night, would you have picked up the keys, or would you have walked away? And if you were Victor, do you think one sincere apology is enough to erase that kind of disrespect, or are some first impressions impossible to undo? Share your thoughts in the comments because stories like this always spark great conversations. If this one reminded you that real character shows up when nobody expects it, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more true-to-life stories every week, and send this to someone who could use a reminder that you never really know who's standing in front of you until life gives them a chance to show you.